Hello and welcome to Headlines Special. Georgia has made an announcement on the suspension of its delegation's participation in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, PACE, after this very body voted to ratify its credentials subject to certain conditions, which the ruling party of the country has evidently found unacceptable. This conditional and limited ratification of credentials by the Assembly has not come as a surprise, for the relations between Tbilisi and Strasbourg have been fractious for some considerable time, with the date of 29th of January being the lowest ebb. A resolution adopted on the 29th, in addition to imposing restrictions on the Georgian delegation and suspending many of its members' rights, also states that the Assembly would reconsider the credentials in April of this year in the light of progress achieved in relation to a number of issues which effectively form the list of conditions. According to the Assembly, the Georgian government should, amongst other things, organize what is referred to as new genuinely democratic parliamentary elections and take immediate and effective steps to enable Georgia to resume the European integration process. The country's opposition has hailed the decision, with members of the Georgian Dream Party describing the decision as unfair and unfounded, whereas Parliamentary Assembly President Mr. Rusopoulos expressed his regret over the decision taken by the Georgian delegation, stating that this jeopardizes the dialogue that could help to advance democratic advance in Georgia. And joining me now are Dr. Vakhtang Maisaya, Head of Geopolitical Research of Georgian Strategic Analysis Center, and Peter Mambradze, Assistant Professor at Caucasus International University. And naturally, they're both joining me from Tbilisi, Georgia. Welcome to both of you.
Okay. Welcome. I would like to express my great respect to you and to all Azerbaijani nations and state at all. And thank you very much for having me on those most important audience.
My first question is going to be to you, Mr. Vakhtang Maisaya. Would you say such a limited and conditional ratification by the Assembly was bound to prompt such a radical reaction from the Georgian delegation?
Well, I would like that the Georgian delegation been also just represented by only one party, just about delegations with the ruling party and so-called just about People's Party, how they claims People's Power, which also just about has like just about remnant of this ruling party. Continuations is a tale, and I guess this just expulsions that both there from their sides to leave the sessions. It's not to represent all Georgian nations at all, because first of all, we have like just about bipolarity in our Georgian our case, because this crisis which been emerging nowadays, political crisis emerging in Georgia now just been twisting into the so-called political just about slide in our country, also could cause a great political destabilizations in this, because this ruling party also just exercising about undemocratic autocratian rulership, and of course with intimidations, with violations of the human rights, and of course with orientations on the occupied Russian directions, which absolutely contradicts and absolutely just about converged the constitutional principles of Georgia. It's also just goes in contradictions of the Article 78 of Georgian Constitution, which directly, precisely just about expose that Georgian government or Georgian authorities should have to do everything in order just to Georgia becomes a member of the NATO and European Union. So, and I would like to mention that at this previous about political just purges, which was conducted by the ruling party, about the beating of the ex-prime minister George Gakaria, even just about illegally arrested about more than peaceful activists, and of course mass media representatives. Most I would like to mention was Zia Amaglobeli, who was very well-known just a journalist and freelance just about media owner, who was arrested and he was jailed. And of course, the PASE, the Parliament Assembly Council of Europe, just directly already fixed that Georgia has about 51 political prisoners, which never ever been just fixed with regard to Georgia. It's absolutely very sad, very just about a dramatic passage, which these democratic-oriented organizations directly just about appeals and made all absolutely correct steps. I would like to mention that Georgia not been just about disposed to join a session. They only have given about some conditions in order just to reinforce democratic leadership, to also just trying to back to the abiding of rule provisions, and to also just keep protecting human rights, which severely been violated and unconditionally violated in Georgia at time of being. So, and of course, they also just appeal to hold new democratic elections, because the previous elections were rigged and were absolutely just about not fitted with democratic and just about fair conditions. It was not only mentioned by the PASE, but it also just fixed into the final report of the OSCE and ODIHR final report. I would like to make citations of the paragraph 32, where the OSCE directly indicated that these elections were neither fair nor just about kept to the democratic pace. So I guess this result is, we can mention that's about not normal to Georgia at all. It's very sad that about exactly 25 years ago, Georgia joined this Council of Europe with Parliamentary Assembly, and then Chairman of the Parliament, Mr. Zurab Zhuania, just directly mentioned, I am Georgian, therefore I'm European. It was very historical just about words, when he was mentioned these words, and unfortunately now, it's very sad that only representatives of the four ruling party representatives, we cannot say that we are Georgians and we are Europeans.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to that particular resolution, circumstances surrounding it. Mr. Mamradze, could we hear your take on the subject in general, first of all, please?
I think it was right decision, because from one side, PASE was not saying that elections were rigged. But in spite of it, at the same time, they were saying you should carry out rapidly new elections, which is absurd, So I really support, in this case, decision of Georgian delegation. I have to mention, being independent absolutely from ruling party for all these years, I often criticize them for wrong directions, for wrong timing, wrong form, but this time I support them. I want to say with all my responsibility, elections were not rigged. And, members of observers of OSCE missions, they were saying it publicly on TV. There were good elections, Of course, Nazi party, Saakashvili's party, which is spread to four parties now, those who passed this barrier. And the second place taken by most ominous members of Saakashvili's regime, they got 4 times, even 5 times less than Dream Party got. Well, I also want to mention rankings of Georgia. According to these rankings, the last ones, Georgia has 15th place in the world, according to, in terms of equality and freedom of political parties and groups, doing better than 5 states out of the big 7, starting with USA, Canada, France, Japan, etc. So rankings are very good, and where are political prisoners? And when they speak about this lady, Zia Magloberi, watch and see how he drags, drags this policeman and then slaps him. And we know very well how such persons, are they journalists or not, are punished in the West. It's also attack policemen and slap them, just provoking, So in this case, what I say is that elections were not rigged, absolutely, that these 4 parties, I know these leaders and people behind them, these multimillionaires and oligarchs, I call them anti-national, anti-state forces. I cannot call them opposition. I always remember, how Madeleine Albright, and she arrived to Georgia in '94, and she said, being really amazed, speaking to opposition at that time, that sorry, but opposition are political groups who are devoted, loyal to national interests. and state interests. And those who are not loyal, you cannot call them opposition. It's much different thing. And that's my opinion.
Mr. Amashov, just let's clarify the point of principle. Tia Sulikiani, a Georgia Dream MP and member of the Georgian delegation to PACE, said that a demand on new election encroaches the sovereignty of the country, and accepting these reservations on our part would be, she said, tantamount to betraying Georgian electorate and the vast majority of the Georgian society. Whatever one may think of her, that particular lady, and the party she represents, and the government of Georgian Dream, do you think there is some merit to what she said? It's not about Georgia, it's about that sort of patronizing, what many people would say, the patronizing attitude entailed in that resolution, sort of a conditional ratification. Any country, not just Georgia, not just Georgian delegation, would have reacted in such a way.
No, of course, it's absolutely just shame for the Georgian delegations. They wouldn't have been reacted so because they accepted these bids. They accepted about rights to present and to also announce their positions. But I would like to point that this delegation never ever just presented Georgian nations at all, because of course the four opposition parties who also entering this parliament, they also just expose a boycott, and also absolutely rightly just boycott, because I would like to mention these elections were rigged. Absolutely it's also uncorresponded, this democratic just about rules, and they 10% being just about how to say, just been manipulated about. And of course we have also just Georgian court, one of the Georgian court also just made evidence that these elections were rigged. Also OSCE and also just about OSCE final report directly indicated that these elections were also rigged and unfair. They directly fixed it directly. And also just about those unlegitimacy positions, because no any just about nations even just welcome, no greeted after these so-called elections procedures in new government. I will mention no any Western countries, neither United States, just Great Britain, European Union, even China, never been just about congratulate this government, this parliament at all. Only 5 nations just about sent formal just about greetings, and that was enough quite well. So there is a problem with legitimacy. And of course, the passé only just about undermine reality. What's now occurring around the Georgia? This is about reality. So regarding about just about this is a big blow to the Georgian dream, which also just launched a anti-democratic and authoritarian type of governance in Georgia. And of course, when they absolutely beaten Georgian journalists, I would like to mention Mitreveli case. I would like to mention even Zia Mavlobeli. It's not a snap. She only touched when she was abused, cruelly abused by the police person and even provoked. And even having snap, it wasn't just be she would not be even jailed in a criminal just about conditions. And even this also when she was even beaten and even just tortured in the prison after this just about case. And she also just declared a hunger strike, and no anyone just pay attention to her. This is about the slam of the democratic, in the slam to the just about freedom of the speech and freedom of the just about vote, being absolutely ruled and violated, ignored in Georgia. So Georgia nowadays became as a second Belarus and trying to be more alike to the Russian Federation's authoritarian type of governance type of nation, unfortunately. And only just political prisoners been also just been recognized by the PASE, not only PASE, even all the international community. And we have nowadays 51 political prisoners in real time, unfortunately. It's a shame for the Georgian reality.
Mr. Mamradze, do you agree with the description of Georgian Dream Party as being pro-Russian party? Because as I understand, Georgian Dream itself never self-described itself as pro-Russian. What is your evaluation of this party's proclivity?
Of course, no, I wouldn't agree, because pro-Russian was Saakashvili and his regime. It was Saakashvili who, citing Lincoln Mitchell, Walter Russell Mead, and others, did, whatever was possible to do to, accomplish Putin's orders. He did it. He delivered all assets of, Georgia, hydropower plants, gold mining, copper, whatever, to Russian businessmen and only to Russians. He brought Russian military bases to Georgia. He and his dear uncle, who is always, mentioned by Russian media as General KGB. I know them. And Saakashvili and his gang, they were those who tortured Professor Maisaya terribly, They were always saying, we had agreement with Russia about entering, with our army, Tskhindval division, is published in the West. And then we were deceived by Russians. So, saying about this, now, Dream Party, did nothing like this. What they are trying to survive. When Ukrainians and then Americans, in spring 2022, asked and forced and urged a Georgian government to deliver all weapons, so-called Buk missiles and javelins, etc., to Ukraine. And Georgian Dream Party tried to explain to them that if they do it, Russians immediately will start to move tanks. And these tanks and artillery and missiles are standing 30 kilometers from Tbilisi through direct line. And there is absolutely no force to stop them. West did nothing for it, and Georgia has absolutely no force. Even if Georgian army tries to do it, Russian aircraft in 7 minutes from Rostov, Mozdok, will be over the skies of Tbilisi, shelling everything. Not saying about Putin's, option to sign decree and to join South Ossetia to North Ossetia and Abkhazia to so-called common states. So situation is really, terrible for Georgia. We have to be very cautious if we want to survive. We have to keep the strategic patience, and that's the right way. Finland's example is very strong. For so many years they did it. Now they are members of EU and NATO. But with these 2 military bases, so close also to Tbilisi, nobody in NATO or European Union ever thinks to accept Georgia as a member to these unions, never ever. They are just trying to put carrot in front of our nation's nose. Do this, do that, and then let's see, it's a lie, it's a terrible lie.
But Mr. Mamaratas, you described geopolitical challenges. You reflected on the necessity of exercising strategic patience. But what do you make of the conditions attached to the resolution, which says that Georgia should announce new elections? You think it's completely unacceptable, but there are some other things about releasing all, that's what resolution says, releasing all prisoners and political prisoners, ending brutality and human rights abuses. What do you make of those conditions? Do you believe there's an element of truth in them? You think they're completely outside the realm of truth? What is your reflection on those particular conditions?
Well, my reflections, what I see is that some forces in the West, lobbyists of Saakashvili's sadistic regime, they are following so-called McCain Institute's report. When this report was published, I immediately sent it to all my colleagues and I started to speak about it on TV because it's clearly put there. If Dream Party wins elections, we have to declare these elections, to be, let's say, rigged, falsified, whatever. We have to support our NGOs. We have to support so-called opposition. And even if they are fined, we have to reimburse them, So what is good after all this, efforts of these forces, believe me, in Tbilisi, there are, at most, let's say 2,000 or 3,000 people in streets, not more. And this is statistical zero for Georgia, while that 1,100,000 and even more people voted for Dream Party. So how could you rig elections so that Dream Party took 5 times more votes than those Nazi criminals of Saakashvili who are on the second place and so on, second, third, etc. I know them. I know them, and with all my responsibility, I know these criminals, I know these persons who were, let's say, spies of Saakashvili's sadistic regime. I will do whatever I can do as citizen to stop them from overthrowing this government that I criticize so much through years. And I will tell you one thing. Now, all of them having strong TVs, shouting day and night that there is dictatorship in Georgia, that Ivanishvili is dictator, that situation is terrible. Where were they when, Saakashvili's regime was so strong and Professor Maisai was arrested and tortured? During these 12 years, nobody was arrested and tortured for, some absurd, or let's say, suspicions here. So they are shouting because they know they are safe. Nobody touches them. Well, they are trying to provoke, as mentioned, Amavlobeli or Gaharia, who is one of the most ominous persons among them, believe me, former prime minister of Georgian Dream Party's time, etc. They are provoking every time. And of course, Dream Party makes mistake. They should ignore such provocations, this cursing, this bad words, etc. Yeah, in spite of being involved in it.
Mr. Maisai, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze said that the decision had no significance for the country, for Georgia. He added that Georgian government had been left absolutely without alternative, and that in such a situation, there's no point in cooperating with PACE. What is next for Georgia, the Council of Europe relations? Currently, the Georgian delegation has suspended its participation. It may lead to permanent suspension, I imagine. What is next? That is the question that I'm posing to you.
Yeah, I can follow up and mention that I fully agree with my colleague Petron about the national security environment, very unstable and very dangerous and geostrategical. We are still under occupation. About 20% of our territory is under the Russians' occupations, and Russians also continues about cognitive warfare against Georgia, one of the type of the hybrid warfare, in order just to change these public opinion perceptions from the west to the Eurasian direction, to the Russian directions. But I guess they are failing now so far. According to about just your questions, what will next? Unfortunately, this just about de facto government also just put itself in self-isolation just about environment. I would say mention like a Taliban just about regime. Unfortunately, I would like mention, and only just a few just about nations recognize its legitimacy. It's a matter of the legitimacy, first of all. Second, the PACE is like a most important international organizations which also just providing this precedence of the key human rights violations about abiding the law, providing sovereignty and democracy provisions in Georgia. And when these delegations try to suspend their activities in their organizations, so we absolutely get a rid of the democracy's privileges out of the country. And we also just provided to get into the, step into the door of the Eurasian just so-called economic union and just Belarusians and Russians directions to the Putin's hell. So, and it's also just dangerous to the Georgian nation interest just about provisional performance and executions. And of course, it could also just endangers about sovereignty principles in Georgia. Nowadays, we have like very huge expansions from the Russia. You want economic, just about political, even partial just about informational just expansion. I would mention that. I would like to mention that ruling party has its own just about TV, just about 3 TVs, which absolutely working on their own set, which also just providing absolutely fake news, which also just about full of this false propaganda, and also just promulgated Russian just about informational indoctrinations to the populations. I would like to mention that one of the TV, Post TV, is like a branch of the NTV in Georgia, which absolutely echoed and copy out what NTV just about widely spreading to the to Russian populations about the same, also rest to the Georgian just about populations. So unfortunately, we are just about nowadays Georgian dream not really represents like a Georgian nation just about entities. It's also just branch of the Yedinaya Rossiya, I would like to mention directly. And unfortunately, directly Kremlin just about fighting against Georgia a new type of the hybrid war, which I call cognitive warfare. It's a new doctrine, new just about theory, which, by the way, Russia also tries to fighting with cognitive warfare even against even Azerbaijan. What's just about Russia just wanted to manipulate it was about how shooting this Azerbaijan airplane, which was happening now, and which also causing that Russian just about this propagandist media also widespread as a false and also about the false informations about this tragic event which was taking place, and also just took away about some of the Azerbaijani citizens' life. Azerbaijan also just experiencing how Russian also just waging cognitive war against Azerbaijan as well as against Georgia. So we should just combine our efforts to protect ourselves from this Russian aggressiveness just about activities, not only at the regional level, but at even just worldwide level too. So this is about real reality. And if Georgian delegations will not be joined this per se, just about sessions, it will be just about it means that we will be losing this war against all the Russian and Kremlin's authorities.
Mr. Mamradze, my last question is going to be to you. To what extent do you think membership in the Council of Europe as a whole, not just in the Parliamentary Assembly, but in the Council of Europe, should be deemed as attractive as it was once for countries like Georgia?
Well, may I tell you that 30 years ago, being MP and being in Strasbourg, I told, we were not member of Council of Europe yet, but I spoke to high-rank officials there, and I told them directly about these double standards that even now were evident from, Council of Europe side. Now it's much worse. And there was this brave man, Ernst Müllermann, who agreed with me. Since that time, what we see, we remember, that prominent persons like, late scientist Christopher Coker was saying about European structures that now we are in a phase when they think something, do something else and speak absolutely different things, So this is why Neil Ferguson recently wrote that, are we Soviets now about the West? Are we Soviets now? And his lecture was really strong, and his article. So that's what's happening. So I'm so happy that Georgia now, in terms of the most rapidly growing economy, is on the second place in the world, according to World Bank, and on the first place in the world, in our hemisphere. Something impossible in Saakashvili's regime, absolutely. Now Georgia joined for the first time this, states with average/high income. Well, number of cars in Tbilisi. Tbilisi is one of the, cities in Europe, top 10 or even less, according to number of cars to population, etc. So this is how Georgia is doing. And in terms of so far, perhaps, last year's estimation will be worse, of course. McCain Institute works indeed and works, intensively. Yeah. And by the way, who signed this report? Laura Thornton, the lady who was NDI chairman here for several years and who was best friends of Saakashvili's Nazis all the time, very close to them. Yeah. So that's where we are. So, what can we do? I support national government in this case, in spite of criticizing them so much. They are quite often, they are making mistakes about timing, about form. And we know in politics and in diplomacy, timing and form sometimes are as important as content, sometimes even more important. Here I agree with those who say that they make mistakes, but we have no time now to make a lecture about it. But general line to survive, especially while this war in Ukraine is going on and it continues and we are still in danger, and populations, they understand it. And even yesterday and the day before yesterday, when decision was made to frozen, our, let's say, participation in PASE, well, there were so many calls. I met so many people supporting it. Because remember James Baker, this great man who was saying, never ever allow other fellow to dictate his own agenda to you. I'm so happy that now Georgian government, national government, is having our own agenda that serves our national security interests. First time, during all these years. And that's very good. This is why they announced that they are ready to start negotiations about membership of Georgia in the European Union, even today or tomorrow, anytime, if European Union offers us to do it. But otherwise, Georgian government is not going to abuse or disturb, European Union putting this issue on agenda. We are not urging. So immediately this lobbyists of Saakashvili's regime in European Parliament, they lost this leverage of blackmail. And that's very good. Yeah. So this is where we are, and I don't care much, right now, Kobachidze was in Saudi Arabia, signed some agreement about $6 billion credit. Yeah, and they will start this construction and so on. Let's keep it. Let's keep it the space, and things change in Europe rapidly. And we are in a very special age when everything changes every month. Europe in 3-4 months will be different from what it is now. This famous words that sometimes dozens of years pass and nothing happens. And then in a few days, a lot of things could happen. It's valid now. This is age of great revolutions. And we have, as a small nation, in a very dangerous place that Brzezinski called black hole of Caucasus. Brzezinski even wrote that there is almost no chance for Georgia to be independent national state in his book, yeah?
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mamradze. I realize that this conversation is slowly assuming a civilizational nature, and I would have loved to continue it with both of you, of course, but sadly our time is limited and I have to finalize the process of this interview now. I'm very grateful to both of you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This for Dr. Vakhtang Maysaya, Head of Geopolitical Research of Georgian Strategic Analysis Center, and Peter Mamradze, Assistant Professor at Caucasus International University, who joined us from Tbilisi, Georgia. See you very soon.